Hello, friends. It's time for our next chapter in the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. Remember in the last chapter that we heard, Bryce had taken Jangles and he said, "We're leaving, we're going to Memphis." And here's the picture of Bryce carrying Jangles. The last chapter was really, really sad. And we talked a lot about how the best books give us all those feels. They make us feel things. So now we're going to read chapter 20 and see what happens next. "How many dancing rabbits have you seen in your life?" Bryce said to Edward. "I can tell you how many I've seen. One. You. That's how you and me are going to make some money. I seen it the last time I was in Memphis. Folks put on any kind of show right there on the street corner, and people pay 'em for it. I seen it." So you guys remember, here was this is the opening picture for chapter 20. And remember how Bryce had kind of put the strings on Edward and the wood so it would make him stand up and be able to kind of move like a puppet? The walk to town took all night. Bryce walked without stopping, carrying Edward under one arm and talking to him the whole time. Edward tried to listen, but the terrible scarecrow feeling had come back, the feeling he had when he was hanging by his ears in the old lady's garden, the feeling that nothing mattered and that nothing would ever matter again. And not only did Edward feel hollow, he ached. Every part of his china body hurt. He ached for Sarah Ruth. He wanted her to hold him. He wanted to dance for her. And he did dance, but it was not for Sarah Ruth. Edward danced for strangers on a dirty street corner in Memphis. Bryce played his harmonica and moved Edward's strings, and Edward bowed and shuffled and swayed, and people stopped to stare and point and laugh. On the ground in front of them was Sarah Ruth's button box. The lid was open to encourage people to drop change inside of it. "Mama," said a small child, "look at that bunny. I want to touch him." He reached out his hand for Edward. "No," said the mother, "dirty." She pulled the child back away from Edward. "Nasty," she said. A man wearing a hat stopped and stared at Edward and Bryce. "It's a sin to dance," he said. And then after a long pause, he said, "It's a particular sin for rabbits to dance." The man took off his hat and held it over his heart. He stood and watched the boy and the rabbit for a long time. Finally, he put his hat back on his head and walked away. The shadows lengthened. The sun became an orange, dusty ball low in the sky. Bryce started to cry. Edward saw his tears land on the pavement, but the boy did not stop playing his harmonica. He did not make Edward stop dancing. An old woman leaning on a cane stepped up close to them. She stared at Edward with deep, dark eyes. "Pellegrina?" thought the dancing rabbit. She nodded at him. "Look at me," he said to her. His arms and legs jerked. "Look at me. You got your wish. I have learned how to love. And it's a terrible thing. I'm broken. My heart is broken. Help me." So he just said Pellegrina. Do you guys remember Pellegrina all the way back from the beginning of the story? Who was Pellegrina? Do you remember? It was Abeline's grandmother. Remember, she's the one who had told him the story about the witch and turning the princess into the warthog. So she's the one who wanted Edward to learn a lesson, and he thinks that he's seeing her. He's on this street corner in Memphis, and Bryce is making him dance. And this woman stops, and she's staring at him, and he's like, "Pellegrina? Could it be her? What do you guys think?" The old woman turned and hobbled away. "Come back," thought Edward. "Fix me." Bryce cried harder. He made Edward dance faster. Finally, when the sun was gone and the streets were dark, Bryce stopped playing his harmonica. "I'm done now," he said. He let Edward fall to the pavement. "I ain't going to cry any more." Bryce wiped his nose and his eyes with the back of his hand. He picked up the button box and looked inside it. "We got us enough money to get something to eat," he said. "Come on, Jangles." And that is the end of chapter 20. We're going to go ahead and read chapter 21. It's not very long either. So here's the picture from the opening of chapter 21, and it says Neil's Diner. So remember, Bryce just said that they have enough money to go get something to eat. So they're probably going to head into this diner. Let's see what happens next. The diner was called Neil's. The word was written in big red neon letters that flashed on and off. Inside it was warm and bright and smelled like fried chicken and toast and coffee. Bryce sat at the counter and put Edward on a stool next to him. He leaned the rabbit's forehead up against the counter so that he would not fall. "What you gonna have, sugar?" the waitress said to Bryce. "Give me some pancakes," said Bryce, "and some eggs. And I want a steak, too. I want a big old steak and some toast and some coffee." The waitress leaned forward and pulled at one of Edward's ears, and then pushed him backward so that she could see his face. "This your rabbit?" she said to Bryce. "Yes'm. He's mine now. He belonged to my sister." Bryce wiped at his nose with the back of his hand. "We're in show business, me and him." "Is that right?" said the waitress. She had a name tag on the front of her dress. Marlene, it said. She looked at Edward's face, and then she let go of his ear, and he fell forward so that his head rested against the counter again. "Go ahead, Marlene," thought Edward. "Push me around. Do with me as you will. What does it matter? I'm broken. The food came, and Bryce ate all of it without even looking up from his plate. "Well, you was hungry for sure," said Marlene as she cleared away the plates. "I reckon show business is hard work." "Yes'm," said Bryce. Marlene tucked the check under the coffee cup. Bryce picked it up and looked at it and then shook his head. "I ain't got enough," he said to Edward. "Ma'am," he said to Marlene when she came back and filled up his coffee cup, "I ain't got enough." "What, sugar?" "I ain't got enough money." She stopped pouring the coffee and looked at him. "You're going to have to talk to Neil about that." Neil, it turned out, was both the owner and the cook. He was a large, red-haired, red-faced man who came out of the kitchen holding a spatula in one hand. "You came in here hungry, right?" he said to Bryce. "Yes, sir," said Bryce. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "And you ordered some food, and I cooked it, and Marlene brought it to you, right?" "I reckon," said Bryce. "You reckon?" said Neil. He brought the spatula down on the countertop with a thwack. Bryce jumped. "Yes, sir. No, sir." "I cooked it for you," said Neil. "Yes, sir," said Bryce. He picked up Edward off the stool and held him close. Everyone in the diner had stopped eating. They were all staring at the boy and the rabbit and Neil. Only Marlene looked away. "You ordered it. I cooked it. Marlene served it. You ate it. Now," said Neil, "I want my money." He tapped the spatula lightly on the counter. Bryce cleared his throat. "You ever seen a rabbit dance?" he said. "How's that?" said Neil. "You ever before in your life seen a rabbit dance?" Bryce set Edward on the floor and started pulling the strings attached to his feet, making him do a slow shuffle. He put his harmonica in his mouth and played a sad song that went along with the dance. Somebody laughed. Bryce took the harmonica out of his mouth and said, "He could dance some more if you want him to. He could dance to pay for what I ate." Neil stared at Bryce, and then without warning, he reached down and grabbed hold of Edward. "This is what I think of dancing rabbits," said Neil, and he swung Edward by the feet swung him so hard that his head hit the edge of the counter hard. There was a loud crack. Bryce screamed, and the world, Edward's world, went black. So that is the end of chapter 21. So I will read chapter 22 tomorrow, and I'll share that with you guys tomorrow. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I wonder what just happened to Edward. It said he hit his head really hard on the counter. I want you guys to think about what Edward is made out of, and think about what might have happened. Okay, hope you enjoyed those, and I will be back for another chapter soon.